December 3, 1944, 0547 a.m. Clark Field, Luzon, Philippines. Technical Sergeant Robert Bobby Kellerman, 27 years old, stands beside a contraption that makes absolutely no sense. A standard GMC CCKW 2.5-ton cargo truck, the workhorse of the U.S. Army, except this one has been transformed into something that shouldn't exist. Welded to the flatbed is a Sperry A-2 ball turret housing, the kind ripped from the belly of a B-17 Flying Fortress. But instead of pointing downward to defend a bomber at 25,000 feet, this turret sits upright on a reinforced steel platform, its 4 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns pointing at the tree line 800 yards distant. The math doesn't make sense. Each gun weighs 84 pounds. The turret mechanism adds another 340 pounds. The ammunition boxes, 8 of them feeding 400 rounds per gun, add 1,200 pounds more. The entire assembly sits on a truck designed to haul supplies, not deliver the concentrated firepower of a heavy bomber to ground targets. Kellerman's commanding officer, a harried major from Ordnance, had explained it yesterday with the kind of desperation that comes from watching men die for lack of adequate firepower. The Japanese are sending bonsai charges straight through our perimeter defenses. Machine gun nests get overrun. Infantry can't stop mass assaults. We need mobile, overwhelming firepower that can reposition in seconds and put down suppressive fire that nothing can advance through. In 6 minutes, when the pre-dawn darkness lifts enough to see the test range, Kellerman will discover if this insane modification can deliver 2,400 rounds per minute of 50 caliber devastation, or if the recoil will simply tear the truck apart and kill everyone aboard. The Pacific War had created a problem that nobody in the U.S. military had anticipated when they designed doctrine for island-hopping campaigns. Japanese defensive tactics, refined through 3 years of bitter fighting, had evolved into a nightmare combination of fortified positions and mass infantry assaults that conventional weapons struggled to counter effectively. By late 1944, American forces had encountered the pattern repeatedly across Saipan, Peleliu, and now the Philippines. Japanese commanders would construct elaborate defensive networks during months of preparation, then supplement static defenses with sudden violent counterattacks designed to overwhelm American positions through sheer momentum and willingness to accept catastrophic casualties. Intelligence reports from the Battle of Saipan in June 1944 documented the largest bonsai charge of the Pacific War. On July 7th, approximately 4,000 Japanese soldiers launched a suicidal assault against the U.S. 27th Infantry Division's positions. The attack penetrated American lines in multiple locations, overran artillery positions, and resulted in brutal close-quarters fighting that lasted 16 hours. American casualties exceeded 650 killed and wounded in rear area positions that weren't equipped or prepared for mass infantry assault. The after-action analysis identified critical gaps in defensive capability. Standard infantry weapons, M1 Garand rifles, .30 caliber machine guns, and even .50 caliber machine guns in fixed positions could kill dozens, even hundreds of attackers, but couldn't generate sufficient density of fire to stop a mass charge before it reached American positions. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun, adopted in 1933, represented the most powerful infantry portable weapon in the American arsenal. Firing .50 BMG ammunition at 450 to 575 rounds per minute, a single M2 could engage targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards and deliver devastating anti-personnel and anti-materiel effects. But M2s in ground service typically deployed as single weapons on tripod mounts or in fixed fortifications. A single gun, no matter how powerful, had limitations. Its field of fire was restricted by the mount. Crew fatigue limited sustained operation.
They arrived too late to participate in combat operations, but Operation Sentry, the European trials program, would subject them to testing covering 2,300 miles of varied terrain across the continent. According to the DRA Advisory Committee report, the trials were a resounding success, with only minor mechanical problems encountered throughout the extensive testing period. The War Office ordered 800 tanks for production starting in November 1945. The specifications that emerged from those trials established standards that other nations would pursue for decades to come. Early Centurions carried heavy cast turret armor in the 150mm class and increasingly improved hull protection across successive marks. The Rolls-Royce Meteor engine powered the Centurion, a detuned derivative of the legendary Merlin engine that had won the Battle of Britain. This 27-liter V12 engine produced 650 horsepower, providing a top road speed of 35 kilometers per hour. Critics noted this velocity was slower than Soviet tanks, which could reach 55 kilometers per hour on roads. British designers had made a deliberate choice in this regard. They sacrificed maximum speed for enhanced protection and mechanical reliability, gambling that surviving enemy fire mattered more than racing across open ground. This design philosophy would be validated repeatedly in combat. The armament told the story of continuous improvement built into the original design from inception. Early marks mounted the 17-pounder, an excellent anti-tank gun that had successfully destroyed Tiger tanks in Normandy. Later variants introduced the 20-pounder, an 84mm weapon with superior ballistic performance. However, the real revolution came at the end of the 1950s with the introduction of the L7 105mm rifled gun. The shock came in 1956 when a Soviet T-54A tank was examined in Budapest during the Hungarian Revolution, and British planners realized the next war had fundamentally changed the mathematical calculations of armor penetration. The existing 20-pounder could not reliably penetrate T-54 frontal armor at combat ranges. The Armament and Research and Development Establishment at Fort Halstead accelerated work on a larger gun in response. The genius of the L7 lay in a single critical design constraint. Engineers at Fort Halstead ensured it would fit into existing 20-pounder turret mountings with minimal modification. Recoil stayed under 290mm to work within the Centurion's current systems. This meant any Centurion already in service could be upgraded to the new gun without designing new turrets or rebuilding the hull. The result was a fleet-wide modernization capability that no other nation could match at that time. The L7 gave NATO forces a decisive advantage in real-world kill probability against contemporary Soviet armor. Soviet intelligence reports declassified after the Cold War described it as a weapon of extraordinary quality, capable of destroying Russian tanks with ease. The gun's effectiveness would be proven repeatedly across multiple continents over the following decades. The Centurion's first combat test came in Korea, where conventional military wisdom insisted tanks could not operate effectively. The terrain was mountainous, the valleys narrow, and the roads primitive. In winter, temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. In summer, rice paddies turned to impossible mud. Every tactical manual indicated this was infantry country, unsuitable for armored operations. 64 Centurion Mark IIIs of the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars landed at Busan on November 14, 1950. Within months of deployment, they had rewritten the tactical manual for armored warfare in restrictive terrain. The Battle of the Imjin River in April 1951 became the defining British engagement of the Korean War. C Squadron provided covering fire for the withdrawal of the 29th Independent Infantry Brigade against approximately 30,000 Chinese troops of the People's Volunteer Army, 63rd Army. Captain Peter Ormrod developed what he termed the firm bases tactic, positioning Centurions to deliver suppressive fire while infantry withdrew through their defensive positions. According to regimental war diaries, Major Henry Huth and Lieutenant Lindsay fought what historians describe as a brilliant and courageous rearguard action lasting nearly an hour under intense enemy pressure. Contemporary accounts record Centurions advancing into Chinese positions with infantry unable to stop the armored advance. The regimental history states bluntly that without the Centurions, it is unlikely the 29th Brigade units or the attached Belgian battalion could have been saved at all. American General John O'Daniel, commanding 1st Corps, observed the British tanks in action. His assessment reached Washington with considerable impact. In their Centurions, the 8th Hussars had demonstrated a new type of tank warfare. They taught American forces that anywhere a tank can physically go is tank country, even the tops of mountains. Korea had proved a tank could climb mountains. However, 1965 would prove something even more unexpected. The Indo-Pakistani War of 1965 provided the next significant validation of the Centurion design. At the Battle of Asal Uttar in September, Indian forces, including 42 Centurion Mark 7s of 3rd Cavalry, faced approximately 168 Pakistani M47s and M48 Patton tanks. The American-designed Pattons were newer, faster, and equipped with superior fire control systems. On paper, they should have won the engagement decisively. Brigadier Thiagraj Kogaraj ordered the sugarcane fields flooded overnight by breaching the Madhapur Canal. Pakistani Pattons advanced into the trap the following morning, becoming stuck in mud while surrounded by Indian fire from 3 sides. According to Indian Army records, the engagement destroyed or captured over 97 tanks, including more than 40 Pattons captured intact. Indian losses totaled 10 tanks. Military historian Stephen Zaloga documented that Pakistan admitted losing 165 tanks during the entire 1965 war, with more than half knocked out during what Pakistani sources themselves called the debacle of Asal Uttar. The battlefield was renamed Patton Nagar, meaning Patton City, with captured American tanks displayed as war trophies for years afterward. Australian Centurions arrived in Vietnam in February 1968, deployed to Phuoc Tuy province. Critics predicted the 53-ton tanks would become static pillboxes in jungle terrain, unable to maneuver effectively. The reality shocked everyone familiar with armored warfare doctrine. At the Battle of Coral Balmoral in May 1968, Centurions defended Australian fire support bases against the 141st and 165th North Vietnamese Army regiments. After-action reports recorded that multiple RPG-2 grenade hits registered on the Centurions but could not penetrate the armor. Final casualty figures showed 267 enemy killed. Infantry commanders who had initially doubted tank usefulness reported they did not like working without them afterward. The Battle of Bin Ba in June 1969 saw fierce house-to-house fighting in an urban environment. Within 1 hour, 3 of 4 tanks were disabled by damage and crew casualties, yet all continued fighting. Final casualties showed 1 Australian killed and 10 wounded versus 99 enemy dead. The after-action assessment described Centurions as a battle-winning factor. Of 58 Centurions that served in Vietnam, 42 suffered battle damage of varying severity, but only 6 were total losses requiring complete replacement. Just 2 crewmen were killed in action throughout the entire deployment, a remarkably low casualty rate for armored operations. The most extreme test came in October 1973 during the Yom Kippur War on the Golan Heights. Israel had acquired Centurions from December 1958, eventually operating over 1,100 tanks designated shot, meaning whip in Hebrew. Under General Israel Tall's reforms, the Israeli Defense Forces upgraded them with the L-7 gun and Continental diesel engines, replacing the original Meteor power plant.
Across the entire Golan Offensive,
Syria attacked with approximately 1,400 tanks, including 400 T-62s and 1,000 T-54 and T-55 variants, supported by over 1,000 artillery pieces. Defending the Golan were 177 Israeli tanks total. In the Valley of Tears sector specifically, fewer than 100 Centurions of the 7th Armored Brigade faced approximately 500 Syrian tanks in that killing ground alone. The fighting was desperate beyond description. Syrian tanks had infrared night scopes that Israeli tanks lacked completely. Night engagements occurred at ranges of 27 to 55 meters, point-blank range, where armor thickness meant everything. Lieutenant Colonel Avigdor Kahalani commanded the 77th Battalion and destroyed dozens of Syrian tanks during the battle, earning Israel's Medal of Valor for his actions. Lieutenant Zvika Greengold fought continuously from the first Syrian attack, going through multiple tanks as each was destroyed beneath him. He later claimed around 20 kills, though other accounts run higher, and the exact number remains subject to debate. What is not disputed is that his delaying action at a critical headquarters location helped prevent a Syrian breakthrough that could have fundamentally changed the war's outcome. By October 9th, the 7th Brigade had been in continuous combat for over 50 hours without rest or resupply. They were reduced from over 100 tanks to just a handful of operational Centurions, yet they held their positions. The Syrians left over 200 wrecked tanks on the battlefield of the Valley of Tears. The technical factors explaining Israeli success were decisive and measurable. The L-7's superior accuracy at range allowed engagements before Syrian guns could respond effectively. The Centurion's minus 10 degrees of gun depression versus the T-55's minus 4 degrees enabled hull-down fighting from ridge positions where only the turret was exposed to enemy fire. Israeli crews achieved faster rates of fire than their opponents through superior training and doctrine. When firepower, protection, and crew training combined, the result was devastating. The Centurion's global influence operated through three distinct mechanisms: direct sales, the L-7 gun's adoption, and the universal tank concept itself. Over 20 nations purchased Centurions directly for their armed forces. Sweden bought 350, designating them as STRV 101 through 104. Switzerland acquired over 300. The Netherlands operated several hundred. Denmark fielded 216. Australia deployed 143. The L-7 family became the dominant NATO 105mm standard, spreading even further than the tank itself. The United States licensed it as the M68, mounting it on M48s, M60s, and early M1 Abrams tanks. Germany equipped all Leopard 1 tanks with the Rheinmetall L7A3 variant. Japan armed the Type 74. Switzerland installed it in the Panzer 61 and 68. Israel mounted it on everything from captured Soviet tanks to the Merkava Mark I and II. South Africa demonstrated the ultimate expression of upgrade potential. Having acquired over 200 Centurions in 1952 and 1953, South African engineers developed increasingly radical modifications through the 1970s to 2000s. By the time the Oliphant Mark I emerged, Major General Roland de Vries noted that almost nothing, roughly 30% of the old Centurions remained, except the characteristic hulls, turret shells, and track skirts. These derivatives incorporated 840 horsepower Continental diesel engines, digital fire control systems, and optional 120mm smoothbore guns. South Africa still operates Oliphant tanks today, making the Centurion derivative the last of its lineage in active military service anywhere in the world. One Centurion story sounds too remarkable to be true, yet stands up to verification through multiple independent sources.
On October 15, 1953, at Emu Field in South Australia, Centurion No. 169041 was positioned several hundred meters from ground zero of a 9.1 kiloton nuclear test called Operation Totem. The tank was left running with a full ammunition load to test survivability.
Several field modification attempts sought to address the side magazine's limitations. Some units experimented with different carrying positions that reduced the magazine's interference with hand placement, though these modifications generally proved awkward and were not widely adopted. Some soldiers reportedly preferred to carry the weapon with empty magazines installed to reduce weight, loading magazines only when contact was imminent, a practice that increased vulnerability during surprise engagements but reduced the fatigue from carrying the heavy, loaded magazine continuously. The FG-42's influence on subsequent weapons development was substantial despite its limited production and employment. The weapon demonstrated that select-fire rifles firing full-power cartridges could be manufactured at weights approaching 4.5 kilograms, validating concepts that would influence post-war assault rifle development. However, the side magazine configuration was universally rejected by subsequent designers, who concluded that the tactical penalties of asymmetric weight distribution exceeded any manufacturing or mechanical advantages that side feeding provided. The post-war American M60 machine gun incorporated design elements inspired by the FG-42, particularly the straight-line stock configuration and the feed mechanism geometry. However, the M60 employed belt feeding rather than magazine feeding, avoiding the side magazine's complications while retaining the straight-line configuration's advantages for controlling automatic fire. No major post-war military rifle adopted side magazine feeding, as the configuration's disadvantages were considered to outweigh its benefits across all tactical scenarios. The FG-42's side magazine represented a classic engineering trade-off where optimizing for one set of requirements, weight, prone firing clearance, and manufacturing simplicity, created complications in other areas that tactical employment revealed to be more significant than development testing had anticipated. The side mounting achieved its intended goals of reducing weight and allowing prone firing without magazine interference, but the asymmetric handling, awkward magazine changes, and interference with natural grip positions created continuous complications that affected every aspect of weapon employment. Karl Richter continued serving with Fallschirmjäger forces through 1944, though he lost his FG-42 during fighting in Italy when his unit was forced to abandon equipment during a hasty withdrawal under Allied pressure. He subsequently employed standard Kar 98K rifles and later received an MP40 submachine gun, but never received another FG-42, as the weapon's limited production meant that replacements were not available for weapons lost in combat. His experience with the FG-42 amounted to approximately 2 months of ownership and one significant combat employment during the Gran Sasso operation. Richter survived the war and returned to civilian life in 1946, resuming his pre-war occupation as a machinist in Bavaria. He rarely discussed his military service publicly, though he occasionally mentioned the FG-42 when conversations with former soldiers turned to equipment and weapons. His assessment remained consistent. The weapon was remarkably capable when it worked as intended, but the side magazine created continuous complications that made the weapon more difficult to employ effectively than its impressive specifications suggested. Richter died on April 17, 1994, at the age of 78. His obituary mentioned his service with Fallschirmjäger forces during World War II, but made no specific reference to the FG-42 or his participation in the Gran Sasso operation. The details of his experience remained documented in military archives and in his own memories, which he had shared with family but discussed only infrequently with others.